further ado, I would like to introduce to you the Vice Chairman of Palm Springs Air Museum and the Managing Director, Mr. Fred Bell.
Well, good afternoon. We've got Q here, Mr. Hinote. We've got Blake Moreland, Ketch Getchell, Lee Guston, Al Whitley, David Francis, and Teabag Salata. I'm never going to let you get away with that one. There we go. We're going to license that call sign. So we're going to do it just kind of conversational, guys, and really feel like you can jump in. They gave me, we had a renaming. I can't read the other side. How bad is it? Tank. We had a renaming ceremony, and the Navy gave me my fluffy call sign, and these gentlemen have renamed me after a great deal of revelry, and I'll leave it at that. So the question I have as I go through puberty here is, and jump in here, the program was secret, and everybody's talked to you about the airplanes and all that. I won't get into that. But did any of you ever think at some point when the program was in the black that somebody had done something and the jig is up and, you know, we've been compromised? And I'll let any one of you jump in at that point as that T6 goes roaring by. So, anybody want to jump in on that? Al, did you ever have any situations where you thought, we've been compromised?
Yeah, we've been compromised. Well, there was a day that I was flying an A-7 as an instructor, chasing an F-117. Do orientation flight, and I was alerted that there was a family en route from Reno to the North Las Vegas airport that had obviously gone a straight line. And we're flying that straight line, and they were flying somewhere they shouldn't. So I was assigned the task to go up and escort this family some distance from my A-7. So their little airplane was going along like this, my little airplane's going along like this, trying to approximate some code airspeed. But I wouldn't say it was really compromised, but I would say that there were some people who were really surprised to look out and see an A-7 on their wing in their family airplane. Of course, I'm sure they had an exciting landing at the North Las Vegas airport. They were met by a lot of people who were asking a lot of questions, and I know nothing else about the incident. But in terms of any real compromise, I'd say.
You think about how many people were involved and how big that was, the program. That's shocking. Anybody else have any stories about where maybe you went, jig is up?
I'm not going to say that the jig was up. We had an accident once, so unfortunately the pilot passed away. It was in Bakersfield, California, up in the hills. And the amazing thing is that the reaction to that was so quick that they had the site secured. They had the site cleaned up completely, where they took the airplane out of the area within a couple of days. In the meantime, they kept it completely under wraps. Some of the police and fire rescue people that were involved in that recovery were debriefed. You know, we actually would, like in what was the Men in Black, we'd actually erase their memory. We have technology to do that. So, but it was never compromised, and it really is amazing that over all the years. We flew primarily at night. Well, we flew at night only for the longest time. We had to also worry about satellite overhead coverage of the fields. And you had to be undercover whenever we knew there was a Soviet satellite flying overhead.
I heard on that, and I don't know if this is true or not, maybe you know, that they actually left parts from a 101 up there or an A6 or EA6 or something up there to throw people off, that they left other pieces, parts up there. Is there any truth to that?
I believe that's true based on my knowledge of what was going on at the time. When that crash happened, I was assigned to the 474th Wing flying F-16s at Nellis. And we had an around-the-clock exercise going on. And I was working in the Nellis command post when it happened. And the response from the senior leadership there at Nellis, and they were up in the battle cab and trying to figure out what the response is and what the press report's going to be. And sitting down there going, wow, there's something big going on, and I don't know what it is. I think it's important to note how tight the security was, that for a guy that had flown A-7s with a lot of people that were up there, who was at Nellis for 4 years on the F-16, and I never had an inkling what was going on. Really.
That's amazing.
And no, they're flying A-7s to advance avionics testing. That's the story.
Wow. Anybody on this side of the house? Any stuff? You're leading me into my next question, which I'm going to ask, but this was actually a good one. Situational awareness in the aircraft. I talked, when we started on stealth, I've talked to some other pilots, and I don't know if this is true or not, that they brought in fighter pilots and then they brought in bomber pilots because some guys were overflying the airplane, and that aircraft that went down was actually inverted, that he got kind of discombobulated where he was and ended up, flying the airplane in. Is that true, or is that just hearsay? It had a F-16 fly-by-wire, so a lot of you came out of 16s, which would make a lot of sense, but did they choose a certain type of pilot with touch for that particular airplane? Blake, jump in.
I would say, yes, my wife, they just chose pilots that were touched. But, to get selected, you had to have 1,000 hours of fighter time for your pick. And that's because you went into an airplane that was totally single seat. The first time you flew was by yourself for a chase airplane. So that, to me, is the only thing that really was important. You're selected by your peers. Somebody would recommend you coming through, but your peers would recommend you, and then they would go and talk to your boss's boss and ask, is this guy good or not? And if you got the thumbs down, you didn't show up in the program. If you got the thumbs up, and I think that got passed along to the squadrons, and those names were posted in the squadrons. And if the guy in the squadron next you, then you didn't come. That's perfect.
Dan, you got something?
It wasn't just that it was a single-seat aircraft, but normally when you go on the fighters, you spend your first couple of years as Blue 2 or Blue 4, and you've always got a flight lead there, an experienced flight lead who's watching you and herding you around the sky and making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. All our missions were totally single ship. You went out at night, nobody knew where you were or what you're doing until you came back and told them. And so when I was being considered for the program, my squadron commander got a letter that basically said, would you trust this guy alone, totally unsupervised, with a national asset? And if the squadron commander didn't come back and say, yes, this is someone you can trust, you wouldn't be picked for the program.
But the airplane's a fairly hot airplane, right? You don't have any flaps. So going over the fence, what's it like landing an airplane with that? And what's it like landing an airplane like that? Talk about that on approach, coming in. And for pilots out there, will understand it, but for laymen, what's it like? Is there a little pucker factor there as you're coming over the fence?
Let me try. For starters, no speed brakes.
Right.
So in flight you can't slow down, which is normally not a big deal unless you're air refueling and you're trying to do a rendezvous with a tanker and you get like 20 knots of overtake, getting close to them, and you can't just like an F-16 or an F-4 bang the speed brakes and slow down. You have to stomp on the rudder and kind of fly this thing sideways, hoping it's going to stop in time before you overrun it. We would commonly carry quite a bit of reserve fuel. So we were not uncommon to land with an extra 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of fuel on board. And some, do I have that right? And because it's been a while. But it was also not uncommon on some combat missions where we had 2,000-pound bombs where we couldn't get in because of the weather. So now you've got a couple hours of fuel extra on board, and you've got 4,000 pounds of ordnance, and you're landing at 5,000 plus feet, and you're pretty hot getting across wire. And it takes a lot of runway and speed brake to, or the drag chute to get you stopped.
Joe, you're trying to get in down there. I'll throw you my mic if it doesn't work.
Testing. Okay. I'll just comment about how it was to land an airplane that has no flaps and no speed brakes, and really all you have to slow down is putting the gear down. Or, as Ralph mentioned, cross-controlling the airplane. But for the landing itself, I came from F-4s before I flew the F-117. So I was used to using a drag chute on every landing and then punching the drag chute off after you slowed down enough and were able to place it on the side of the runway. But in the F-117, we had a much larger drag chute than the F-4 ever had. And one of the cool things I always thought was it was also black, which matched the color of the airplane, so it looked pretty cool as you deployed it. But it would slow you down pretty good, although you had a lot of energy coming in. You were probably 145 knots. Okay, 150 plus gas. So that's pretty fast touching down. And we had a hook. So in case you ever had like total brake failure or hydraulic failure, but it wasn't much of a hook. It wasn't an F-4 hook designed to land on a carrier. You wanted to use it on the departure end, not on the arrival. But it was actually pretty good. The trickiest part of after landing was to punch off that drag chute, because we have a swallowtail in the back of the F-117, if you look at it in the hangar, and the buckle for the chute was attached in a compartment between that swallowtail. And if you didn't do it right, you could bang one of the two rudders, and they were quite expensive. So you don't want to do that.
Joe, if you don't mind, I'll find out. I was an instructor after we got through the Desert Storm, and to your point, he and I both went up force together at Seymour Johnson, so we knew how to dump the chute, get it off the side of the runway easily. But when you took a guy out before he ever flew the airplane, you'd be in a truck, a pickup truck behind the guy, and he would get down the runway about 100 knots, and then he would pull the chute, and you have to talk him through getting the chute dumped properly off the side, because it was not something that most people did until they got into this program.
Just one more thing to add to the drag chute. On the F-4, we raised our canopies and we would, move our mirrors around so we could actually see the parachute behind our tail. And you got so good at placing that chute and draping it over something. If you wanted to play a little trick on the people, you'd come up to, one of the shacks at the end of the runway and drape it over that, because you knew it was going to be a harder problem for them to pick up the drag chute.
Well, before any of these kids were born, I checked out in a single-seat, single-engine airplane called the F-100. It was a C model, no flaps. There wasn't such a thing. And needless to say, it was an exciting ride both on takeoff and landing, especially on about my fourth flight. I had a canopy unlock light. And unfortunately, even with the drag chute working properly, I still ended up with hot brakes, and hot debrief from my instructor pilot who met me at the end of the runway. But another story that a lot of people don't appreciate is the fact that to slow this airplane down when all else fails, there is a tail hook. There's a pyrotechnic charge that surrounds the area that houses the tail hook, and you have, when you select with the tail hook to come down, that pyrotechnic charge is supposed to blow off, and the tail hook is supposed to come down. But as some of us up here remember a night when we were deployed for Desert Storm, we had a young man on our runway that we did not usually use. And off the end of that runway was about a 300-foot drop. And anybody in the tower that night when you, and the call was? Yeah. And unfortunately, the hook did not come all the way down. As I understand, the charge did not blow the entire section off. The hook was just kind of dangling. And it's my understanding he then went to the term barrier. Unfortunately, that runway, if money could buy it, they had it, came up and caught the airplane. Now, if you can imagine 833 going about 180 knots running into a barrier like that, it's not nearly as pretty as it is right now. It ripped off a lot of those pretty things on the airplane. It became an instant hangar fling and a source of parts for many months to come. But again, that field elevation where we were deployed was 6,700 feet. That was even higher than Tonopah. And so these young men and myself, we had some exciting takeoffs, and we had some exciting landings, especially when we had to haul 4,000 pounds of bombs back. And as Ralph is saying, when the weather was shaky, and it was the worst weather that they had recorded in the last 40 years, there's always a chance you might have to divert somewhere because of fog. In fact, when we came back from the first morning of night one, Tommy Crawford, who was also a bandit in my first tour in the airplane, ended up dragging his entire F-117 squadron to our location because they couldn't land at their location because fog bank had moved in. And so Ralph's right. We had to be very careful about our fuel.
So you guys are just doing a great job setting me up here. So you had no threat detection on the aircraft, right? It's all passive. So it's visual. That's your only, we talked a little bit about it the other night when we were revelry. Yes, coming up with names. There you go. Talk a little bit about that. Okay, you're up there, as I understand it, and this is only from interviews, you can't really talk to anybody, right? You're in a hot area, so you know they're looking for you. And I asked you that question the other night. Did you ever, you may want to elaborate on that, did you ever think that, okay, somebody's found me up here, they're looking for me, and at some point into the fight, the Iraqis had to know something was bombing them. They couldn't figure out what, and I'm sure the Russians who were advising them were telling them, giving them advice. What's it like up there, and what happened when you thought you'd been detected? You're in the air.
I think there's probably, I'll just answer one. There's two ways you've been detected. One was an air-to-air asset, and one was a surface-to-air asset. So I'll talk about the air-to-air asset. One night we're going up, and I'm hitting a target in Baghdad going from west to east. And the Syrians had lit this massive fire, or whatever it was, on their border. And if we had to bail out, that was where we were supposed to go, was towards that fire, so we could, be picked up by the good guys, supposedly. And I'm out there flying to my target, and I look and I see, and I thought it was an airplane. I thought it was a wingtip light or something from this airplane. So I'm like, okay, what do? Because we don't have any weapons to defend ourselves except to just hide, basically. I push the power up, try to go a little faster, and I'm looking, and he's not moving. He's staying right there on the canopy, exactly where he was the first time. I pull the power back.
slow down, see if he, goes forward again. Still there. Well, he's a million miles away. It's just a light on the ground, so that's why it's not moving. But I finally just said, if he sees me, he sees me. If he doesn't see me, he doesn't see me. Put your head down in the cockpit, do your job, go on.
One way they detected us was when bombs went off. When we were in training, we would fly these routes where we'd all just fly in line 10 minutes apart, and that was standard training route. When we went to war on the first night, and remember, we were learning this as we went along because nobody had ever gone to war in a 117 before, but we thought we would compress the time. And the first guy to drop a bomb, General Feast, was hitting a site very close to where my target was, and so they said, okay, Dave, you go 1 minute behind him. That's really compressing the time, 1/10 the time that we use, in training. Well, they're all sitting around knowing there's probably going to be an attack that night, and all of a sudden a bomb goes off. What do? They all start shooting up. They know something's up there. So I'm 1 minute behind General Feast. I see the bomb go off and go, oh, this is great. And all of a sudden, there's all this AAA right over the site, right where I'm supposed to go and drop my bomb. So we learned after that you either separate by a good long time so that the barrels get hot and they stop shooting, or you hit within 2 seconds of each other so they don't have time to start shooting the second guy in line.
Anybody else? You got one? They could see you theoretically if they were above you, right? On IR? No. Okay, so you
Think of the design of
jump in here. That's why I'm asking.
Think of the design of the airplane, and if you haven't thought about this, I encourage you to go out and take a look. Imagine trying to come down to intercept, do a tail conversion on this airplane, and you've got the swallowtail, as they called it, and that obstructed it, the exhaust ducts. Not around like a regular jet. It was flattened out. There was a space shuttle tile technology to reduce the heat. So coming down, look down angle, the tail blocked the exhaust. Similarly, if you get behind the airplane and kind of hunker down a little bit and look up, you'll see the design completely obstructs it as well. So to have an up-looking IR shot,
Not going to happen.
there's great design, very clever.
Well, now you go into the target. Let's talk about that. Head down, right? Maybe explain that to people. We're talking shop here, what that is, and you're talking about intervals, about how you had to hit the target. You flew 200 miles, and you have to hit a target within plus or minus 3 seconds. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? What's that like? Going in, how did you got target resolution? We'll talk a little bit about mapping, because you guys kind of brought me in a little bit on that. I'll talk a little bit about that. But what's it like flying that airplane? You have an inertial guidance system, I guess, in the airplane that's telling you, I'm here, right? You hit your waypoint, and then you run into the target. Why don't you bring it up from there?
Typical attack. Keep going.
A typical attack.
Basically a 2-minute straight line to the target. And what
When it hits the table, it's doing really good. Tap it out in Morse code.
Okay. 2-minute target run.
He's being stealthy, guys. Leave him alone.
Generally started with your system looking basically level. You can imagine looking out the front of your airplane and you walk across a parking lot with a soda straw. You can see out there, but as things start moving down, things start moving really fast and you don't see as much anymore. So that's kind of what we're looking at with a forward-looking IRAD, infrared detection system. So it's out. Basically, you have 3 photos on your map, on your keyboard, and you you basically have a picture of 1/3 back end, and your cursors are over the target area. When that picture starts looking like what's on your keyboard, you take that off, put it down, you look at the next picture, it's 1/3 better. Meaning, as you get closer, more details show up. And then, when that looks like, this looks like what's on your keyboard, you take that one and then you look at the individual target, and you've done all this target study back in the ready room and on the way up, you've looked at targets all on the way in. And what you're looking for is a DPMI, the desired point of impact, where you want this thing to go through that window or that hangar door or through this way. And when you get in range, it's all about bomb range when you drop a weapon. The lasers start saying they update it, and you get the cues, you're in range, you pickle the bomb, the doors come open, the bomb falls out, the door's shut, and then it tucks. And then what you want it to do, have as much impact. It's got all your energy, and they're all going to ask, how fast were you going? I subsonic. Okay, that's all we can say about that. How high were we going? Medium altitude, that's all we can say. Even now, we can't say our altitudes or our airspeeds. And what it does is tuck, and if you of those that know what a VOR confusion is, you're trying to put it in that basket. So during the terminal portion of the bomb fall, it's going to open up its IR sensors, and you want to have those cursors right on top of that hangar door or that vent. So the laser seeker opens its eyes, you are transmitting the coded laser ranging, and it will guide if you move your cursor. So you want the cursor sitting right on the target as much as you can and track it all the way into impact. Let's say your target's over here, but your system's saying it's over here. That's a problem. Okay, so if you can identify, hey, that's a target, you can take manual control of your cursors, do an update. Now you've updated your INS system, and now your aircraft will fly right over the target, come in range, doors are open, you pickle the bomb off, it dies, and it opens up its eyes, and it sees the laser ranging, and it'll track it right into the hangar. All this is happening as you see the airplane with a FLIR, forward-looking IR sensor that looks forward, but when you drop a bomb, it's behind you when you pass over the target. So now it has to hand itself off to an ELIR, which is a downward-looking IR.
Taking pictures of it, we went to air shows. So a lot of the experience that I had was really taking the aircraft that had been used so well in Desert Storm, had been used again in Serbia and Kosovo in an operation called Allied Force. And unfortunately, one of our colleagues had actually been shot down with an airplane. So one of the important things that happens as an airplane matures is the enemy starts to adjust and adapt, and we had to adjust and adapt. So in many ways, the airplane that I quit flying in 2004 was a very different airplane than the airplane that they flew in Desert Storm. So, for example, we could talk to people because we actually had antennas that were flush with the side of the aircraft. We had weapons that could go through the clouds, and we had the ability to update through the global positioning system. And so there were all sorts of new things that we brought on board. But one of the most important things that happened as we brought the airplane out of the black world into you might call it the gray world, where a lot was still classified, but the existence of it was not, is we began to be able to talk to our colleagues in other aircraft and be able to figure out how to use those aircraft together so that there was great synergy. And we were able to do that in places like the weapons school, where we were welcomed into the weapons school in 2003. And so we were packaging aircraft by the end of we were flying together. We were enabling other aircraft, they were enabling us. And so the teamwork aspect of flying the F-117 grew in importance along the way.
That's something I didn't know. Jump in.
I was just going to say, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times the assets you're talking about, EA-6Bs, EF-111s, they highlighted us more than they hurt us more than they helped us. Yeah. Because if you turn on the EW asset, you're letting them know that something is coming. Okay? They couldn't see us. Literally, they could not see us. So if that asset went off and started transmitting, they'd start firing their guns, the AAA. And then we'd have to fly through the AAA to get to our targets. So it was probably better if they, for us, at that point in time, we didn't have anything like that.
What I want to talk about
is the antithesis of what you were saying, sir, is by 2003 or so that we were part of a bigger team. We could all work together and talk together, and we had additional capabilities and capabilities that we just didn't have, like having your own GPS system, the ability to have a GPS guided bomb.
And in Desert Storm, I'm going to try to put something in perspective for you. It'd be like if somebody closed these hangar doors all of a sudden, slammed us all in here together, and gave us a problem that we needed to come up with a solution with in a very short period of time. And oh, by the way, your life depends on it. You could just imagine the activity that was going on throughout the theater during Desert Storm. Ann and I, and our daughter Liz and her brother rolled into Las Vegas on a Thursday afternoon. We had a change of command at 10 o'clock the next morning. We had our little mandatory welcome the new commander of the officers club, and about 4 hours after the change of command, we got our deployment order. So my first move was to say, Ralph, what do we do now? No. Ralph was the squadron commander of the 415th, which had been tasked to deploy. So the first afternoon that I'm the commander, I tell my family goodbye and uprange we go. And Sunday morning, we were airborne. Ralph and I on the C5 with our mission planning van on our way. Headed to the other side of the world. There are a lot of units that have preceded us in the previous 10 days or so. There are people who are going to the same town we are coming in. My point is there's a lot of confusion. It's not the greatest communication in the world. And perhaps one of our biggest obstacles was we were being handed off to a senior Air Force commander who had never seen the F-117, much less have any idea of what it could do and what it needed. It was fairly unique. In the next several months, that proved to be somewhat of a challenge for us because at every turn of our efforts to integrate into the total force, we ran into a lot of paradigms that worked against us rather than for us. We worked through those one at a time. And we saw it across the entire spectrum, moving the proper weapons for us, all of our logistics requirements that were very unique, our communications requirements. But I had great people. I had the greatest people. And that's one thing that, having been with this unit at its very beginning, starting in January of 81 for myself until I left in June of 85, and Bandit 150, I don't know how or why, maybe they thought I was expendable. I was fortunate to be the first guy to fly the F-117 in the 4450th. But I trained the next guy, we got the next airplane, we trained the third guy, we get the third airplane, we trained the fourth guy. And you got to start somewhere. But we lived inside of us, so to straw. The rest of the world didn't know about us. They didn't know, which is a well-kept secret. And that's great and wonderful. And we had thousands of people across every single specialty code that you could imagine, officer enlisted. We had the best of the best. And I just dare you to give them a challenge and give them something to do. They would do it. That had only gotten a lot better in the 5 years that I was gone. And I showed back up for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And I quickly realized these great people had only made it better, and the thing I needed to do was to stay out of their way. And my task was to get them what they needed and to get it as soon as I could. We worked through that. I think the Desert Shield was actually a blessing for all of us. I think we will all agree for the 117 it gave us time to get the unique things that we needed. Please talk about looking through a soda straw and managing our photographs. Those 3 photographs were extremely important in our ability to find the target, looking through that little soda straw. Literally, you turn out the lights in here. I can see through that soda straw, but I can't see anything else. So we had a B-52 INS at that time. And if it was working, you could find your target. How would you feel if you were in a situation where you couldn't get those photographs, even though we knew they existed? So there are probably a couple of thieves sitting up here at this table who volunteered to go help people better understand our requirements. And they said, gosh, these guys are really helpful. They want to come up and help us. And they came back with big suitcases of gifts for themselves and their fellow pilots at times. But we found workarounds. There's some others I won't get into. But we learned a lot of lessons from Desert Storm all across the Air Force. But we're here talking about those in the F-117. And Joe Salata and another fellow had the opportunity as a young captain and major, I think, to take a briefing all the way to the Senate House Armed Services Committee. How high did you go, Joe? How high did that briefing go that you and John gave? All the way to the president. That's how things that we really needed were provided in the years to come. We continue to be provided with the people that we needed, the best of the best. I think it was a great example of American ingenuity, capability, determination. And I've been assured by my good friend down here on the end that we're continuing to do that in a number of areas. And we just have to continue to trust and support our military in hopes that we'll be able to do that at the next challenge that we face. And I think most people in this room would agree that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, that there will be another challenge that we'll have to meet. And I can't say enough for not just these men, but for the many female officers that we had and many female enlisted that we had on our team. One of the first things I heard out of Ralph's mouth the first morning was he started using the term team stealth. And that stuck with us throughout. And team stealth wasn't just the then 37th Fighter Wing, or 37th Fighter Wing deploy. It was the Skunk Works. It was Sacramento. It was any and everybody who was involved in supporting our effort. And I know I'm getting a little long-winded, but I think it's one of the most important things for us to all understand. Literally, probably tens of thousands of people were involved in making all this happen. And the one that I have to say never really gets the credit that they deserve. Yeah. The spouses and the families that put up with the tremendous amount of separation. And that continued on. But I must tell you, it was a sly group of rascals that I inherited in August of 1990. It's one thing to be a problem solver, but man, these guys could find a way around about anything. So I am very proud to have been their commander, extremely proud of what they accomplished, but it was only a step in where we need to keep going. And I think it's important that all of us remember that And also, while I got the mic, I just want to say, on the other end of that is preserving our history, because that's really where we learn our many lessons. And you folks are so, I don't just consider what a blessing you have to have this airplane. And God bless you for everything you've done to support it and to take good care of it. That is a tremendous bit of history there. And I commend you for that. Keep it up.
You're making me weepy here, Al. I'm going to flip the script on you a little bit. You know, I had the opportunity to interview a Green Beret team. We talked about this was another event, and talked to other teams of guys. And there's always, when you interview a group like that, there's always one guy that everybody else says, that's the guy. And that group at that time, there was this very quiet, well-mannered gentleman who all those other Green Berets said, he's the guy. If we didn't do what he did, we'd all be dead, right? He's the guy who pulled us out. In your case, and in this group's case, the interview, and I'm going to ask you guys, I think he's very articulate, but you guys should talk about Al a little bit, and, you know, the fact that what his mentorship meant and what he did, because I've heard from each one of you that he was the guy that took the bullet and made it happen. And so maybe somebody can pick that up, because I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, my friend. So jump in, anybody.
As we got into the program, we all appreciated the technology and the capability that this airplane had to not only to be able to penetrate what we knew was going to be a very sophisticated air defense system that not only had Russian systems but also had French integration into it, and all that worked together. Great number of challenges, but as Al said, to get the things that we needed to support wasn't there to start out with. We made one really good move when we got ready to move the airplanes out, and we weren't even sure where we were going. It was, well, you're going here, then you're going there. Well, what's there? We don't know. They show us a satellite photograph, and we go, well,
That's how much they love you all. They're running along for you. And what do we do to break? Well, sending out one of the back doors. There we go.
So we weren't even sure where we were going, and so we decided to. And fortunately, down in Nellis, they had ordnance, and we put 2 laser-guided bombs, 2,000-pound class laser-guided bombs, in each one of those airplanes. And in the deployment, we carried them over. And for the first 6 weeks, that's all we had was the ordnance. We were good for one mission. And General Horner, who was the air boss, his planning staff was calling down, and they're saying, okay, we want you to put 6 airplanes on alert. We're going alert? We don't do alert. We have to plan a mission. We have to know where we're going. We have to do penetrations analysis. We have to do all that. Well, we want you on alert. Okay. But for the first 6 weeks or so, all we had was just one load of bombs. And then one night, we were in your office, and we got a call, hey, there's a disruption at the front gate. And he sent me down there to see what was going on, and there was a buck sergeant and a Saudi guard, and they are arguing with each other, which is kind of difficult because he just speaks Arabic, and this one, just speaks English, and they're arguing, and we finally got one of our liaison guys down there. We go, what's going on? And said, well, the argument is, where are we? Are we at Kamis Mouché, which is what we call it, or are we at King Khalid, which is what the Saudis call it? And they saw this, so what's the big deal? And the buck sergeant says, well, sir, I have a present for you. And we went around the corner, and there were 15 flatbed trucks loaded with 2,000-pound bomb bodies and fins and guidance units and all that. And they had given 2 buck sergeants a Jeep, a couple rifles, some MREs, some waters, and all these trucks driven by third country nationals, and they had loaded up on the Persian Gulf side, east side of Saudi Arabia, and had driven 500 miles across the Ruba Khali to deliver this ordinance to us in southwest Saudi Arabia. I mean, to think of the kind of people that we've got in our military, that you can take a couple buck sergeants and say, you've got to deliver the goods, control all this. I told the sergeant, I want to hug you and I want to give you a beer. But we don't have any beer here, so you're going to have to be good with a hug. That was the kind of pressure to get everything we needed that weighed so heavily, and this guy was the point man. We're doing our training, we knew what we needed to do, but unless we could get those assets, we were going to be dead in the water. They would be asking us to perform a mission that we couldn't do. And to be sitting there with all that technology and feeling just unable to pull the trigger was very frustrating.
Joe? I just want to say a couple words about Colonel Whitley because we were kind of an elite group. At least we thought we were. We had to be recommended by our peers to even be possibly selected. Everybody that was in the unit had to approve your name. Only one veto was enough to get you off the list. So we were a lot of high performers. We were independent thinkers. We were cocky. We thought we could do anything, as Colonel Whitley was talking about. But it took a special leader, especially during Desert Storm, to be able to lead that kind of group. Colonel Whitley was not always the easiest person to work for. He was very demanding of us. And sometimes would have to dress us down. But at the same time, he always had our utmost respect. And I think you can't be a leader without building respect with people that work for you. I took him as an example when I eventually became a commander during Allied Force. And, you see different commanders over the years when you're in the Air Force. You see some that you know you're not going to copy. You see some that you know you are going to copy, and Colonel Whitley was definitely one.
Dave, you jump in? I'd just like to add my kudos to Colonel Whitley. I don't think people appreciate just how difficult it was. He talked about Team Stealth and the different organizations that worked on the aircraft, but for Desert Shield, we had Guard, Reserve, Active Duty, people pouring into Camise. It wasn't people we even knew before. We'd have, they were the Aerial Port Squadron, the Combat Controllers, the Mess Hall folk. People from all over the country are coming in, and Colonel Whitley is tasked to lead this entire group and turn them into one cohesive unit that's all working for the same goal and moving it forward. And Team Stealth was one of the ways we did this, by making sure everybody knew they were part of the team. So he was leading a group of cocky guys who were trying to learn how to go to war with a new system. He was taking a bunch of people who, a lot of them were kind of surprised to be deployed and to be at a place with an airplane they'd never seen before. And he's on a Saudi base. This wasn't, something that the Americans had dug out and we had the base. He had to deal with the Saudis there on the base who owned the base, who ran the place. And they also had some Kuwaitis there too, I think. They had a whole bunch of Kuwaiti enforcers. Anyway, there was a lot going on in this base, international, getting ready for combat, and Colonel Whitley led it all. And I'd also like to say that he had combat experience. He had been in Vietnam. So when he talked about what we could expect, and he gave us a couple pep talks about what it was going to be like on our first night, the first time we were shot at, when he told us this, we listened because we knew he was talking to us from experience. So the job he did over there was just absolutely incredible.
We can add much more of that. Ralph talked about getting the munitions in there, but even if we had the munitions, like Colonel Whitley alluded to it, but if we had the bombs, that's one thing. But if we don't have the tools that we need to do our job, that's another thing. And if it wasn't for Colonel Whitley, we would not have gotten those tools. And he single-handedly did that, and we all appreciate that. And I think that at times he feels that he was kind of the brunt of some higher-ups' wrath because of that, but we all deeply appreciate what he did.
All right, that's all. We're all here. I have one final question, and we're going to open it up, try to get out of here on time, and that is the psyche, the impact that airplane, the 117, has had on the national psyche, and the amazing aura around it to this thing, Dark Star, behind me. We put the tail up on our site, and in 4 days we had 1 million hits, 1 million views on that. When we did the 117, we were starting on the restoration. There were bumpers with the Air Force museum folks about what we could talk about, and because they're still very sensitive about that airplane. And I got a call that, hey, we had an airplane in the Dark Nights that was photographed up somewhere up there. And by the way, you're going to hear about this, and then they're going to deploy somewhere else. And sure enough, about 2 days later, he flew by some photograph up there, flashed him a shotgun, and he's got a picture of it, and it ended up on some website somewhere, and all hell broke loose down here because we had that airplane sitting over in the maintenance hangar. And I had no idea, I think, about the magnitude of how interested people were in that airplane until that point. They went crazy, and every time that airplane deploys somewhere, whatever they're using it for, I don't know what it is, the people go nuts over it. Did you have any feeling, and Q, this is for you too, Dark Star behind us is a mock-up, right? It is. But its roots are in 117. There's no question that SR-71 and then 117 influenced people on that. Did you ever have any idea that you were involved in something of that magnitude? And maybe Q, talk about what you can talk about from a follow-on standpoint about what 117's impact is, its legacy. Anybody jump in? Did you ever have any idea you were going to be like rock stars of the aviation world? Anybody? Say something or I'll dance here. Q, what's a legacy?
I think
what we had the sense for was that this airplane had the promise with this new technology to do what Air Marshal Giulio Douhet was talked about back in the 30s about strategic bombing and the impact that aviation can have on shaping modern combat. And we know from the strategic studies after World War II that this whole idea of the bomber's always going to get through and he's going to have pinpoint accuracy, and none of that really happened because the technology wasn't there. With this airplane, we had two elements. We could penetrate some of the most heavily defended areas in the world, in this case Baghdad, with relative impunity, and we had the weapon systems to be able to routinely drop bombs within 6 feet. We were dropping them down vent shafts in aircraft shelters. The notion that we could take an airplane like this and hit 60% of the strategic targets that were nailed during the war, because we have the ability to come in unscathed. We're not having to pull a lot of G's and jank and chaff and flare. We can focus on target accuracy, and we can achieve the results that the air boss and General Schwarzkopf is looking at in shaping the whole war. After night one, we were the only guys that went downtown Baghdad because we were the only aircraft that could go down and do it with any kind of acceptable losses. And these guys did it night after night.
Kim, jump in. What's legacy?
So I feel very fortunate in that I had a chance to fly the airplane in some of its later years, but also I had the opportunity to see the progression of the technology going forward all the way to where we are today and tomorrow. And what I'd say is that in 1991, stealth, the technology itself was a shock to air combat. It was a revolution. Nobody had seen anything like it, and it became something that not only were we going to push forward, but so would our enemies. And that ended up happening. So one of the interesting things that happened along the way is that in the United States, we had two aircraft companies that were very proficient at creating stealth airplanes, but they were very different. In fact, this airplane behind us, the mock-up, has the Skunk Tails, the Skunk Works logo on its tail. That's Lockheed Martin. And then we had Northrop Grumman, who had flown a flying wing way back at the end of World War II and discovered, hey, there's some things about this aircraft that make it pretty hard to see on the radar. And what ended up happening is there were two very distinct lines of stealth development. And then eventually, when we got things that we thought they were supercomputers at the time, now we could all carry them in our hands. But the computing power calls this stuff out. So as an example, one of the things we were talking about earlier is that the way of doing stealth that we have, you weren't going to be able to see it in a certain waveband of infrared. Well, what ended up happening is our potential enemies go to another band of infrared, and they go, oh, this is easy. So what we have had to do is play the cat and mouse game all the way through. And I'll close on this because I think it is important for everybody to know. So stealth is one aspect of technology, military technologies that are changing the way we fight. A lot of people today like to say things like this. Well, all the innovation that's happening in the United States is happening in Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston or places like that. And I will be the first to say I love going to those places, and I love finding out what they're doing. In fact, I think we're going to be using a lot of those technologies to make our world safer. And I'm excited about that. But I always tell people when they say things like that, stop. You don't know what you don't know. And in places around this country, there are things that are happening in the technology world that are, in some cases, I would call them, I think of them as magic. And I'm a physics major. But when I see the things that we are doing in the counter stealth world, I start going, wow. I'm really proud, and I'm really proud that we still have companies that can do these things. We still have workforces that can do these things. A lot of them are over in Palmdale, not very far away from here. But we are creating new technologies to stay ahead, to give our people an edge, and to be able to take air combat to the next level. And I'm really excited about that. And I tell people this all the time. I wish I could show you all the cool new airplanes. Because you would be so proud. And
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. We are going to take, Kevin, you want to get a mic? We take a couple of questions from the floor, and then we'll wrap this up. First of all, Let's get a round of applause for all these guys who are national treasures. We're very, very fortunate to have men like them at a time in history when we needed them. All right, and with that, Kevin will do just a couple of questions and get everybody out of here. Raise your hand if you've got a question. Real quick. There's a question.
My name's John, and I'm a 44 50th veteran, 4 years. And I'm also a docent here and at the Evergreen Museum up in Portland. One of the questions we get a lot is, why is it called an F-117, not an A or a B?
Who wants to answer that one? Why is it F?
There's a lot of history of fighters and bombers and attackers, and the discussion was amongst the tactical fighter guys, we wanted to be a fighter. We didn't want to be called a bomber. We could have been called a bomber, but back in the early 80s, who remembers SALT talks, STAR talks, all that kind of stuff? Okay, well, our national made some agreements with the bad guys, so we were limited to what we could have in our inventory, and that was one of the major reasons we became fighters. We didn't want to be A-117s either, even though we are attackers, and we are level bombers essentially at the time, but we wanted to be fighters. We were fighter pilots, we were fighter pilot mentality, and it was important. It was a very important day at the 44 50th, and then later on as the 37th when it was designated the F-117, and everybody just took a big sigh of relief and said, yes, we are fighters, we are F-117s, and we didn't have to have that discussion any longer.
All right, we'll do maybe a couple more. Anybody else have any other questions? I see a mic moving back there.
Yes, I do have a question, and that is, if any of you had an opportunity to fly the F-22 or the 35, and if you did, how would you compare them to the 117, just in terms of being able to fly it?
Anybody fly the 22 or the 35Q? You're probably the closest. You could probably speak to the differences, though, couldn't you, between the aircraft?
So, it's a great question. And I get asked, so I was also an F-16 pilot like many others, and I get asked a lot about the difference in the way that they flew. Just very different missions and different approaches to them. What we see now with the F-22 and the F-35, I think one of the major differences is that the information flowing into the cockpit is orders of magnitude more, and the ability to sort through that information is also orders of magnitude more. And so in essence, you have now flying computers with stealth bodies, and these flying computers can do some things in the information space that create very important effects for our joint force.
All right, and my only observation on that, and I'm a complete layman, is it appears that they seem to be much more sensitive about the optics on the 35, the front end of the airplane or the sensor package, than they are on the 22, and I don't know what that means. And that's only from a standpoint of I've had to deal with the security requirements on the aircraft, and I don't know anything more than that, so you probably know more than I do. Next question.
I will say, there are a lot of aspects about both airplanes that even to this day we don't talk about. And a lot like when we were talking about the F-117, it came out of the black world. We acknowledged its existence, but we did not acknowledge all the different capabilities. And that is true today for almost every one of our aircraft. And that was a lesson we learned. We learned that lesson from the experience of these folks here. And we learned that the amount of work it takes to hide the existence of an aircraft is so hard. And so what we ended up doing is we said, we're going to talk about the F-22. We're going to show pictures. We're going to talk about the F-35. But we're not going to tell you what it does. And that's still true.
Yeah, when we do air shows, every once in a while you get the guy that shows up with the giant lens camera, and he gets right up on something, and he's not taking a picture of the airplane. He's doing something else. Generally, people with guns show up. Last question. Hold on for just a second. These airplanes are so damn loud. Why are we at an airport? All right, try that again.
What are we doing to bring our younger generation of future flyers into this technology and making it better? Because there's where your innovative ideas are coming from.
Hugh, I think you're going to get the ball on that one again.
So I just left the Air Force as the Chief of Air Force Future. So we've been thinking a lot about the combination of technologies and people. And there's a bunch of different ways I could start to answer your question. But I'll say the first thing, and we saw it last night, is we have a very active set of programs at the high schools to try and let people know about the opportunities that are available to them, not only with the Air Force, but also with the Marine Corps, the Space Force, the Army, and the Navy. And you'd be amazed at the amount of quality people we get out of those programs. In addition, we open up our bases a lot more than we did before. We have the air shows. I was inspired by some air shows when I was coming up, and those are very important for us. I'll also say that there are quite a bit of people across our country that are concerned about our ability to produce enough pilots. As you can see, there's a lot of pilots needed in the United States. And the honest truth is we're not producing enough. When I say we in the United States, that includes all the military pilots that we're producing, but also all the civilian pilots. And we are way short. Now, if you're a pilot now, that's good because everybody wants your services. You can charge whatever you want. But what is true is that we are going to need more and more pilots, even as we're going to fly drones. That's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of unmanned aircraft out there. But even with that new development, we are going to need more and more pilots. And there's a concern, and that concern is translating into some proposals for action where we think about the training of our pilots as a national problem that folks like United and American team up with the Air Force, the Navy, and such, and we begin to think about how we produce enough pilots. The last thing I'll say is the very leading edge of thought on this, and one of my friends talks about football. So it's the Super Bowl today, so we'll go ahead and do that. So the idea that you would start training a professional football player at 21 or 22 or 23 is stupid, right? None of us would do that. They all play popcorn. They all play, in high school. Why do we wait to train our pilots until they're 23? That's crazy. So one of the interesting things that's happening, and you guys are going to get involved in this sooner or later because of your first flight program, is that it is obvious to us who have been through the pilot training that starting our young men and women early is key. So, and this is the national imperative. So we need an early pilot training program. And not just because we want military pilots, but because we want good pilots flying these airplanes out here. And I think we are going to see in our lifetimes a change in the way we think about training pilots.
Great response. And yeah, the biggest challenge we have right now is trying to get kids excited about aviation, everything we can do with that. This will be up online on our YouTube channel. All of these gentlemen are featured in From Stealth to Sixth, the documentary, which you guys haven't seen yet, but we'll get out. You're all rock stars. And we're going to get you a link and get that out to you here shortly. So look at that. And I want to thank all of you. Give yourselves a hand today for coming out. Thank you so much.